All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, other Paul. Paul, some of you may know, has written for Military Images, did a fantastic job on a story that folks are still talking about, the 3 Confederate prisoners at Gettysburg. And thanks to Doug for handling all of the technology. I appreciate that. So we're going to talk about, as you know, Civil War portrait photography. I want to start with a name you all know, Matthew Brady, right? One of the great exciting things about him is, had the war not happened, he would have been known as a celebrity photographer. That was his stock in trade. The transformation that he made from a celebrity photographer to the father of photojournalism is pretty darn amazing. And because of him, we have all of these images, of course, not all taken by him, but taken by his team. He had this idea, and others followed in his path. Of course, we're not talking necessarily about battlefield photography. We're talking about the portrait photography tonight. Brady's first foray into war photography is largely forgotten, and it dates to summer of 1861, just down the road around the defenses of Washington, D.C., around Arlington and Alexandria. Brady sent a bunch of photographers out from his studio to take images of all of the soldiers that had come from Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and elsewhere to be the first defenders of the Capitol. And so thanks to Brady's efforts during the summer of 1861, we have these amazing images of folks that were in the camps. They were building the forts and doing all of that work to get the defenses of Washington set up and prepared for who knew what. Now, fair to say, Brady and his contemporaries, they understood the power of portrait photography. So many images that survive capture the lives and, thanks to a little research, the stories of all of those men who served in the ranks and women who served as nurses as well. Tonight, we're going to get into 4 questions. I want to give you a bit of an origin story. I also want to empower you, so when you're looking at Civil War books, if you're watching something on YouTube or elsewhere and you see these images, I hope that the 4 key questions I'm going to cover tonight will help you appreciate these images in a different way. So we're going to talk about why these images exist, what were the popular formats, why did they pose this way, and how did the war impact portrait photography. So let's start with the first part. Why do these images exist? Bless you. It goes all the way back to this man, Daguerre, and building upon the work of others. He was not alone. There was a whole group of people, a couple generations, who were interested in phosphorus chemicals. They were interested in the camera obscura. They wanted to make a permanent image for commercial purposes, long lasting. Daguerre is the one who had the breakthrough. And of course, it wasn't something that was sold by the country of France. It was given to the world as a gift because it was technology and it was exciting and they knew it was going to change the world. All of the images from the 1840s into the early 1850s are all by Daguerre's invention, of course, the daguerreotype. All of these images, now of course, they were made in reverse. There was some problems here with these images. They weren't in color, and because of the technology around the lenses, the images appeared in reverse. I'll get into a little bit, get into some interesting tidbits about that a little bit later on. The first war photography is here, the United States, the war with Mexico in the mid to late 1840s. This war was not systematically photographed. These were images that were taken by perhaps a photographer standing on top of a roof, in a particular town. There was no army photographers who were following either army. So we have a small number of scattered images from the war with Mexico. Around this time, as the daguerreotype is growing in popularity, what do people do? They want to make it cheaper. They want to make it more affordable so everyone can get a photograph. So beginning in the early 1850s, folks begin thinking, well, you know, the silver and copper plate that the daguerreotype is with this expensive gold chemicals on it, that's a lot of money. So let's change the silver plate for glass and make some cheaper chemicals, and then you have the ambrotype, cuts the price down. And then in America, we come up with this idea. What do we have? We have a lot of iron. So we figure an iron plate is even cheaper than glass, and it's more stable. So we bring the tintype into the world, brings the price down even more. Now, back to the idea of that reversal problem. I've scoured books, newspapers, to try to find a reference of people complaining about the reversal image. I could not find one for years until this advertisement, which is from the dawn of the ambrotype, about 1856. And it mentions here, highlighted in yellow, they're not reversed, but they're positive pictures. This is the first time, so 15 years have gone by before folks are beginning to ask questions about the reversal problem as we would think of it. And I'll talk more about that later. Meanwhile, while all this daguerreotype and ambrotype and tintype is happening across the world, there is a radically different view of how photographs could be used. The same year that the daguerreotype is announced, there's this idea that photography could be used for more utilitarian purposes, and this particular magazine, Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, offers a view of the dangers of photography. Here's a quote. "What will become of the poor thieves when they shall see handed in as evidence against them their own portraits taken by the room in which they stole in the very act of stealing?" That's frightening stuff. Now, everything and everybody may have to encounter his double everywhere, most inconveniently. Does this feel familiar at all to you? It does feel a little bit like Big Brother, doesn't it? This idea that technology is going to film your every move. It gets worse in 1839. Here is a revolution in art, the daguerreoscope and the photogenic revolutions. They don't even have a name yet for photography or a daguerreotype. They are going to keep all of you down. The painters, the engravers, the sketchers, your jobs are over. You're done. Your careers are ended. Jobs are gone. Technology is going to kill your jobs and your livelihoods. Sound familiar? Yeah. Technology. We always have this fear reaction to new technology. The same was true with photography. It continues. By 1851, you have French publication are talking about crazy ideas. They're now over the fear, but they're talking about these crazy ideas. You could put portraits on business cards, passports, hunting licenses. This is crazy stuff for the time period. This is no longer stuff that's going to be on the wall of your home. This is stuff you're going to carry in your pockets for identification and other purposes. A few years later, we want to talk more about the employment of the photographer for a more utilitarian class. For example, the traveling salesman. Why do you have to drag along a wagon of goods when you could have an album of photographs and shop it around? It would make life so much easier. This is 1855, and you know where this goes, right? But this is 170 years ago where we're talking about these items. Same publication, 1855. Now they're making fun of the Americans, as they like to. The Yankee man of fashion, it is said, does not descend to the prosaic plan of engraving his name on visiting cards. He fills his card case with photographs, of course, of himself. The arrogant Americans, the upstarts, and hands these photographs out instead. So this idea of putting your name on a card and handing it out, how pompous. This is where we are today. Things do not change that much. Photo albums to Facebook. Now, the daguerreotype, the ambrotype, the tintype on metal glass, they're not really easy to move around, right? And they're very difficult to duplicate. You can't make duplicates very easily. So they're not really fit for these kinds of democratized utilitarian purposes. So while the daguerreotype is out there enjoying its reign, having a virtual monopoly until the ambrotype and the tintype come along, a different format, a different idea of photography is revisited, and it's all based on this man in 1839, William Henry Fox Talbot. He develops his own process of photography. The daguerreotype is over here. Talbot's process is a paper negative from which prints could be made. And I know today you're like, so what? Back then, huge deal. Did not really catch on because the quality of his prints did not compete with the daguerreotype, which is why we see him pictured initially in a daguerreotype. Here he is in his own Talbot type, as I like to call him. So it was relatively successful, but it just wasn't the high quality that the daguerreotype had. And these distinguishing factors were important. Then, about 1851, or about 10 years before the Civil War, this guy, this British man comes in, Archer, and he's like, the idea of paper as a negative, not so sure about that. The paper has a tooth to it, and so the prints you're going to make are not going to be that great. And how about the chemicals you're using? These chemicals, not necessarily the best. So Archer comes up with a different process, same idea, making prints from a negative, but he substitutes glass for paper and a different chemical cocktail called collodion. So he has these breakthrough inventions. And then this guy, a Frenchman, Evrard, he has his own idea for making the finest paper to print from these glass negatives. Egg whites to make it nice and glossy and smooth. Albumen paper. So between Archer and Evrard, you've got the paper, you have the negatives, and voila, you have a photograph that is as competitive as the daguerreotype. This is all happening around the time of the Crimean War, and so many of these images, like this one by Roger Fenton, shows the glass plate negative and albumen technology. It's easily as beautiful as a daguerreotype. We also begin to see for the first time the lower ranking officers and enlisted men in the ranks. You don't need to be a colonel or a general to have your photograph made or your portrait painted. You can get your image made in the field, and we can see what you look like. This gentleman, Didery, a Frenchman, he takes it a step further. He's like, wow, I like this glass plate. I like this chemical thing. I like the idea of portraits, and I'm going to create this visiting card idea. I'm going to revisit that. He develops a camera. The camera has 4 lenses, as you can see here, and the idea is simple. He puts in a glass plate negative. He opens it. He develops your photograph, closes it back. He develops a print, and then he cuts that print into 4. And you have 4 portraits of the same person, each at a slight different angle. And now you can make multiple copies of prints from that glass negative. They're called visiting cards, or in French, the carte de visite. It's not popular, really, in the beginning, until May of 1859. We're getting close to the Civil War now. May of 1859, the emperor and empress walk into Diderot's studio and they say, you know, I heard you're making these interesting photographs. I'd like to have a couple of them. And they get the photographs made. And of course, everyone in Paris wants to have their carte de visite made. Catches on like wildfire. In London, the following summer, same thing happens. Victoria has her photograph taken in the carte de visite format, and it's all over London, it is all over Great Britain, and it comes to the United States. All of this, of course, coincident as the storm clouds of war are gathering across the country. This is called cardomania. I'm not making it up. You can look in newspapers.com and you will find references to cardomania. It sweeps the world. And part of that is because all the mass production that is now available, we're having a revolution in industry is growing, technology is growing, makes it possible. By late 1860, early 1861, you're seeing advertisements like this in American newspapers all across the country, not just the big cities, small towns, villages, out in the territories, you are finding these advertisements for the carte de visite, which of course we're going to Americanize, and we begin to call them card photographs. You also see advertisements for albums. What do you do with all these modern trading card-sized images? You have to have something to hold them in, so photo albums are born. So that's a little bit of the history, taking it right up to the beginning of the war. Now, get into the popular formats. I talked a lot about paper, these paper images, these albumen prints, the cartes de visite. This is the Facebook of the 1860s. This is the social media. You share them with family and friends. You usually keep them in albums. There's a great quote that I want to share with you. This comes from John Hanavy in his Encyclopedia of 19th Century Photography. He describes them as small ephemeral commodities which were widely available, easy to hold, easy to pass around, easy to look over by the dozen within a drawing room. These are touchy-feely artifacts, not to be looked at with deferential awe, but to be cataloged and collected, gossiped, and commented upon. You can be as catty as you like as you're turning the pages of the photo album, looking at old women, young men, whoever. You can do it. By 1863, you have Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the great thinkers, one of the great Renaissance men of America, says card portraits have become the social currency, the sentimental greenbacks of civilization. That's how popular they had become during the war. The other images I also talked about, the daguerreotypes, the ambrotypes, the tintypes. The daguerreotype is now fading it's fading away by this time because the ambrotype and the tintype are gaining in popularity. These were the personal items for the hearth, the bedroom, a side table, a pocket, a vest pocket, a loved one to keep close to you at all times. Here's a great description by Don Keyes in the Art Journal. He says, and this is where we get into the reversal thing I talked about earlier, giving a hard plate portrait was a personal and intimate gesture. The images were easily carried on one's person, comfortably fitted into the hand. The lateral reversal of the picture meant that the image was familiar not only to the sitter, but to the person who was receiving it. So I'm giving you my reflection. There's a value in that. Of course, during the war, you don't have to choose one or the other unless your photographer is limited in what kind of chemicals and supplies they have available. So it's not uncommon that a soldier would get one of the hard plate images to send home to mom and dad or to his wife or a loved one to be kept in a safe, quiet place at home. And then the paper images, the cartes de visite, those you're handing out by the dozen to your comrades and anyone who asks for them, the Yankee man of fashion, doing his thing. Now, how popular were they? I did a little survey on newspapers.com to find all the citations, mostly advertisements for the different formats. And as you can see, the daguerreotype in green is still quite popular in 1861, mostly because people are beginning to copy them into the paper formats. So by 1865, that green bar has declined dramatically. The ambrotype also, that was the highest of the high in 1861. By 1865, it has declined. The tintypes in blue, they sort of bubble below the surface, never really taking over any of the other formats, but they're still relatively popular. Now, the cartes de visite, or CDVs, as collectors call them, see the red bar, how it skyrockets. They're just coming on the scene in 1861. By 1865, everybody wants to have them. Third question, why did they pose this way? A couple of different answers for you. One of them is the technology. Exposure times were improving. Back in the Daguerrean early era, you could be sitting there for quite a long time. I once sat for a daguerreotype that took 2 minutes. So it can take a while, and try holding your face for that long. So exposure times did not exactly support spontaneity, although by the time of the Civil War, it might be 15 seconds or so that you had to pose. So the times had come down, but still, it's not really a spontaneous medium. But there's always someone who's going to push the envelope. There's always a joker in the deck. The classic thumbs up. Pardon me. And of course, the occasional smile. So, although it was not really spontaneous, folks would find ways to be able to clown around before the camera, much as we do today. Another answer, imitation. You see George Washington in an oil portrait or an engraving in a book. You see Napoleon, another well-celebrated and admired military figure in America of that period, and other prominent men and women throughout history posing these regal poses. And if it's good for them, it should be good for you, right? So you begin to see, in some cases, the generals. I don't know for sure that McClellan was impersonating Washington's pose, but surely some of the military martial stances derived from what folks saw. And the spirit of imitation doesn't always have to be super serious. You can also see these other famous portraits that were engravings in books and come up with your own fun way to imitate them. So we like to have fun, no matter the medium. Another answer to this question, it's the photographer's direction. Think of the photographer of the 1860s as your doctor. You're going to listen to your doctor most of the time, right? And your doctor's going to tell you, they're going to hopefully give you good advice. Well, one of those doctors of photography is Marcus Aurelius Root. It's a great name. He wrote a book in 64 called The Camera and the Pencil, or The Heliographic Art I Will Not Continue Reading. It's essentially a handbook for photography. Buried deep in that book, close to the end, are a number of pages dedicated to telling you how to take a great photograph, and it boils down to 6 things. So as you're looking at photographs, think about Marcus Aurelius Root's 6 tips. The figure should be off-center. Why? It adds visual interest to a photograph. If the person is right in the center, you have sort of equidistant on each side, not quite as exciting. So shift a little bit. Number 2, The distance between the lens and the figure should be greater than the figure in the backdrop. It increases the spatial feel, and this is a good case in point. This Union soldier, the heels of his brogans are literally up against the canvas backdrop that's behind him. Makes him look more prominent. 3, the distance between the top and the bottom of the figure should not be equal. You want more space at the top. The thinking is it makes you look taller. People want to look taller, supposedly, or at least Root thought that was the case. Number 4, the figure should be composed in an engaging manner. So if you want to copy a pose from your drill manual, well, that makes for an interesting photograph. It also is a bit of a trick by the photographer. He wanted to keep the subject still, and he wanted to keep equipment still, and so having him pose this way, this Confederate soldier with his arm pressing against his chest also keeps his musket from shaking and becoming blurry. So 2 reasons for that. 5, light your figure at a 45-degree angle. The light's coming in. You have a light source here. Why is that important? Because if you have a light here, what's on the other side? Shadow, right? The light and the shadow makes a face look round. If you have the light just straight on, you look flat and not as attractive. And again, people want to look good in their photographs. Number 6, when all else fails, just keep it simple. Take out your Bowie knife, take out your revolver, tuck it in your waist belt, and just look cool. Here's another answer. A personal style. This is a thesis that was done by a member of one of the national military parks. Austin Sundstrom is his name, and he came up with the idea, proposed the idea, the concept, that there's 2 personal styles, the restrained and the martial. The restrained style, as Austin suggests in his thesis, it values faith, it values family, and it values your personal business success. This individual, this officer, notice how his saber is being cradled in his lap. It's not necessarily the focal point of attention. The focal point is his eyes and his face. He's looking at you, everything around him. He's sitting very casually. That sword is off to the side, pointing off to the screen. There's a very simple canvas backdrop. There's no military camp scene around him. You're not seeing any small or long arms. And you wouldn't see any long arms because he's an officer. But you're basically seeing an officer with his sword. It's calm. It's more about him in the center of the photograph. Now, here's the other side, the martial. What does a soldier want us to see? How many weapons can you fit in one photograph? I believe there are at least 5 by my account. There are so many weapons, so prominently displayed, that it appears he has to move his head to one side to make room for all of them. If that wasn't enough, look at his cavalry insignia on the hat. The hat is sitting on top of the photographer's table, which has been moved to the front. So what is he telling us? He's telling us, I'm a cavalry soldier, and I'm ready for anything, and I'm ready for martial action. So that's the difference between the restrained style and the martial style. So when you're looking at photographs and you see that these individuals have chosen these poses, it might be because this is, again, what they want you to see. Number 4, and the final question, how did the war impact portrait photography? Now, in the North, you have a booming economy. Immigrants are flooding in. You have a massive army. You have the U.S. Sanitary Commission, the Christian Commission, all of this infrastructure that has been built to support these armies in the field, there's a lot of money and there's a lot of demand for portraits of soldiers and sailors. So photography in the northern states is going gangbusters during the Civil War period. Now, in the South, not so much. Winfield Scott gets credit for his great snake plan, the Anaconda Plan, to choke the Southern economy by establishing a blockade, as you all know, around the coasts, the Atlantic coast, the Gulf Coast, splitting down the Mississippi River. And this is most effective in destroying large parts of the Southern economy. And that, of course, includes the items that are considered to be luxury items, of which photographic chemicals would fall into that category. Richmond is a case in point. 1861 to 1862, the Confederacy is getting started. Richmond is a massive depot for soldiers, for equipment, the seat of government. A lot of photographers are there. A lot of people wanting to have photographs to be sent home are there, and photographers are thriving. 1863, as the Army begins to leave and move further into Virginia, into places like here in Maryland and Pennsylvania, the galleries begin to suffer. And adding to that, you have the blockade, which is becoming all too successful for the Southerners, and chemicals begin to decline. By 1864, the situation becomes desperate. The leading photographer in the city, Charles Ricard Reese, is placing newspaper ads offering outlandish amounts of money for a single bottle of chemical. So they're really beginning to struggle at this point. It is said, on a side note, in Mississippi, you will not find a photograph of a soldier taken between 1862 and April of 1865. That's how bad it was. After Richmond falls, in April of 1865, those photographic supplies come right back into the city almost immediately. So what does this mean for the photographs that you see of Confederate soldiers? So many of those images show men, soldiers, looking like this. They're wearing very unique uniforms that don't seem to match. Those of you who are students of the first Battle of Bull Run, if you went to the reenactment that they had some years ago now, you saw all the different kinds of uniforms. And what you're seeing is mostly the militia outfits that they wore when they formed in late 1860 and early 1861. The idea back then was not to be standard at all, because you wanted to have a uniform that represented your town, and you wanted to look better than the people in the next town. So you had all kinds of interesting designs. And so a lot of these images survive because photographic chemicals and photographers were plentiful, and you did not have Union armies invading and occupying your towns. By 1865, when those photographic chemicals come back in and these now former Confederates are posing for one more image, you will see more of the traditional uniform style that we think of today, the butternut, the gray, similar looking to the Union uniform, the frock coat, and all of that stuff. So data confirms this. Again, this is another study. This time of 869 identified portraits of U.S. and CS soldiers. Looking at them all broadly, in the United States, 74% of the images we studied are paper. 7% are ambrotypes. 16% are tintypes. Now look how that changes. In the Confederate States, the paper images are only 18%. And remember, the paper images, those cartes de visite, they were in their infancy in 1861. They never really made it to the South until the end of the war. The ambrotypes and the tintypes far more popular in surviving images of Southern soldiers. Okay, parting shot, and then questions. This is my estimate of cartes de visite published in the United States during the war. Give you a little point of comparison. The estimate for Great Britain is about 675,000 per year. I think it was way higher here, mass producing of images. Now, let's say 4 million, let's say 10% survive. You still have 4 million images that are out there. And if you're a collector, that's very good news. Now, here's the other side. Every 2 minutes, the next 2 minutes, we'll take more photographs in the world that were taken in the entire 19th century.